Muscovites are left without electricity, cooking food using improvised means, burning candles, and praying to Putin. Magyar officially announces total blackouts in Moscow. Mom, I'm scared. They blew up the power plant.
Looks like there won't be any power now.
Mom, come here.
The elevators have stopped, appliances have burned out, and communication is down. The third blackout in 24 hours. People are charging their phones in their cars. Welcome to harsh reality, racists. And so it will be until the end of winter. Freeze, freeze, wolf's tail. Last night, a series of strikes hit CHP and oil refineries in Orlov, Vladimir, and Yaroslavl.
Looks like there won't be any power now.
It's tough, damn it.
Substations are essential components of the power grid.
And fuel oil storage. Neptune missiles destroyed Moscow's CHP. Do you know what part of the CHP they broke off?
Due to the emerging threat of the Ukrainian armed forces using long-range unmanned aerial vehicles, there is now a risk of strikes on critical infrastructure sites.
Sobyanin has been ordered to urgently inspect Moscow's bomb shelters, and churches would do better to pray for protection from tomahawks. More than 200 drones have already attacked Russia in one night. Fifth day. The power grid is crackling and Moscow is in darkness for the first time. And at night there were strikes on the thermal power plant and oil refinery.
Fuck. Damn. Shit. Oh, just... Fuck, man, what a bang when it exploded. The thermal power plant there exploded. Eagle, there was a thermal power plant explosion there. There was a thermal power plant explosion there. Corridor, what's happening? There was a thermal power plant explosion there.
Vladimir, Yaroslavl, everything is on fire. All...
That's it. It's burning and blazing there. It's on fire here. And I'm there, yes.
Russia is entering a phase of energy collapse. Let's discuss all this with renowned journalist Olesya Basman. Friends, it's a new weekend, November 8th through 9th, and as always, we're here with Olesya Basman, a well-known journalist, to discuss the key events. Olesya, I'm very glad to see you.
Dasha, hello friends, I'm glad to see you too.
I've prepared a new list of strikes. What I really like is that for the first time we attacked the largest power plant in Russia, the Kostroma GRES, causing massive blackouts. Magyar reported that over the past 10 days, we've attacked more than 10 thermal power plants. Blackouts in the Moscow region.
The power was cut off in the residential complex.
Protests in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other regions because everyone is already discussing the nationalist march. Oles, how do you assess this week?
What is this? Of course, this is a civil war. A real official civil war is a process of disintegration, which is becoming more and more apparent within this decade. And the worse the economic situation gets, the more this whole swamp will rot. Nationalist marches are actually good news. I mean, you called them nationalist marches, but to put it bluntly, these are marches of Russian fascists. They believe that Russia is for Russians, just like Hitler's followers once believed that Germany was only for Germans. And they've taken to the streets, mind you, this is practically the capital, they've already come right up to the Kremlin, pressing against it. They took to the streets in response to the fact that Russians in Russia don't want to work. For all jobs, especially blue-collar ones, and now not just blue-collar, people from Central Asia are coming. So, to put it simply, Dagestanis are coming, Uzbeks are coming, more and more are coming, and Chechens are coming too. And this really absolutely infuriates these Russian fascists. Basically, all Russians, as far as I can tell from their social media, and we monitor it constantly, not just the fascists, but even just ordinary people who aren't ready to go out and march or actually go beat up people of other nationalities. It annoys them. It's inside them, you know? They hate everyone except themselves, and even then they gladly beat each other up too. But Russian fascists, you know, that's already reached a boiling point. when they saw that the number of people from other republics and other nationalities was reaching a critical mass. These are mostly Muslims, who, by the way, have many children, who live strictly by their own rules, and they don't adapt to the environment. Instead, they make it so that the environment adapts to them. They're already becoming afraid to go out on the streets. They record videos and express outrage, wondering how this could be happening. When there are Muslim holidays, it's scary to go outside because there's a pilgrimage happening near the mosque, even on children's playgrounds. I see how these Russian mothers post videos on social media saying, "You, look, this is Moscow, this is the capital. And on this playground, there are only Muslim children, only Islamists, and we're the only Russians here." So they're in this kind of panic, you know? And what's happening is an internal revolution. What is this? This is a harbinger of civil war. Because right now these marches are peaceful, but tomorrow so-called SVO veterans will join them, and on both sides of the barricades at that. All it takes is, a little spark, a tiny flashpoint, a bifurcation point that will change the course of history. Now, we understand that at the front there are both real Russian fascists and a huge number of people from the republics, because they were the first ones to be drafted there as well. And just imagine these bloodstained killers come back from the front and join these movements, and it turns into crowd against crowd. But now it's not just crowd against crowd, it's army against army, only with Russian Federation passports. What is that? Of course, that's a civil war. A real official civil war that, attention, is breaking out. Not in some national republics, though it will start burning there too. And oh, how it will catch fire there. But it will be happening in the largest, most important cities where revolutions actually take place. In other words, we're talking about all of this happening in Moscow, and it will happen in St. Petersburg too. But the main thing is Moscow, the Kremlin. That is, whoever controls the Kremlin, whoever owns the Kremlin, holds power in Russia. That's why this phenomenon should not be underestimated. This is a very important warning sign, and it needs to be watched, monitored to see how it develops. Mobilization will also come into play there. That is, for now, you see, Putin has chosen this path as if, well, he's afraid to announce a mass mobilization. That's why he made it around the clock, year-round, draft into the army. But in essence, this is the first step in that direction again, because it's not coming from a good place. Now let's move on. You're talking about the strikes that are currently being carried out on strategic targets, military targets, strategic facilities on Russian territory. These strikes will intensify. Of course, they will intensify. And Russia is facing a difficult winter. How successful everything will be and how much we will be able to achieve in this area remains to be seen, because the plans are ambitious, but everything will still depend primarily on the behavior of Trump and Europe, which, as always, will be watching Trump. What Olga Stefanishina talked about in the interview is an important matter, but she was rather commenting on the agreements and negotiations that are ongoing. In other words, for now, there is no global decision yet, so to speak, that he has signed and given. That is, this is what we had before, and we remember it was still in our hands. Even the decision was ready on the table, and all the infrastructure and people were prepared for dispatch. 10 Agapkovs, according to our insider information. It doesn't matter that it's not much. The main thing was to convey this political event. And then Donald Trump invited Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington on Friday to personally deliver it. But on Thursday, Putin called him, and we remember how everything started spinning again, and time has been dragging on ever since. So this whole topic is still kind of ongoing for us. But what I want to say, friends, is that we always discuss things as they really are, and it's important just to feel strength within ourselves to live, to fight, to work, and to survive. We need to assess events and reality very adequately, meaning we shouldn't fall into either hysteria or excessive euphoria. That's why it's very important to understand that Ukraine may also be facing a very difficult winter. And when, including from Ukrainian officials, there are calls to Ukrainians, guys, if you can, try to prepare. Each of you do what you can for yourself, buy a battery, do this or that, stock up on some supplies, and so on. Just in case, make sure you have the ability, especially if you live in a big city, especially Kyiv, because we understand that for Putin, Kyiv will be remain a strategic target in order to try to freeze it out in the winter. You see, this is absolutely nothing new. So if you're in a big city, just keep in mind, just in case, where you could go if, God forbid, something happens, someplace you could leave to in order to wait out the cold to get through the winter. What I mean is, every Ukrainian, given that the war is ongoing, that it continues and is fierce, needs to have some kind of plan in mind, at least theoretically, in order to be prepared for any difficult events. It is important to consider, even if only in theory, how one might respond to various challenging circumstances that could arise as a result of the ongoing conflict. Even from this perspective, I was looking at the weather forecast. Well, maybe nature will help us out this time too, because it seems that Ukraine is not expecting a harsh winter. At least that's what the meteorologists are saying. But we also understand that, again, all these forecasts from the Hydrometeorological Center are always a very inexact science. And even when we check the weather for tomorrow or the day after, it doesn't always match up. And if we're talking about 2 or 3 months ahead, it's also hard to predict anything. We hope so, because, of course, it's very important for us. The warmer the winter, the less chance Putin has to actually freeze out any Ukrainian city. You understand? That's why we realize that it's difficult here, and it's tough on the front as well. Of course, every day on the front is incredibly hard, but thank God the Ukrainian army is holding its positions. They're holding the line, and we can even see some successes in certain directions. So on the contrary, we are taking back our territories. So when you asked me how this past week was for me, you see, I just sighed like that because of everything that's been happening. I really wish for some turning point events, just like all of us do, something that we could really talk about together, saying, here it is, it finally happened, and now we understand that there will be a pause, not at the expense of Ukrainian interests, of course, but that the war is either being frozen or coming to an end. Well, we don't see that yet, meaning that for now, all of this will continue.
Yes, of course, it's very important that every week Olesia and I discuss absolutely real events. We don't live in illusions. Friends, give a like to this tandem of ours. Alicia and I always try to look at events optimistically, but we discuss what's actually happening. Write in the comments if there is any way to support Ukraine, the armed forces, and where you are watching us from. Old's great topic, food ration cards. So I also read the day before yesterday that in Russia, they are planning to introduce them in several regions, food ration cards, including next year in the Moscow region. Well, right now, honestly, I don't really understand what's going on. But they have an energy crisis, right? I mean, they don't have gasoline, there are coupons, but why do they need food ration cards? I don't get it.
Well, that's obvious. These things are directly connected. Look, it's all economics. It's a closed loop process where, just like in nature, in ecosystems, there are no unnecessary elements. For example, if you wipe out some sparrows or field mice, and that's it, everything falls apart. It seems like it doesn't really matter. Well, so what if some species goes extinct? But then the whole ecosystem collapses because it's like the butterfly effect. One thing leads to another and then another. And in the end, there are no more pollinators, and as a result, the river dries up, and then people lose their drinking water, an epidemic breaks out, and so on. And that's it, you see? So, in fact, the same thing happens in the economic ecosystem of any country. So look at what's happening in Russia. An economic crisis, a severe and far-reaching one, triggered by the ongoing war, that is, with large-scale, extensive military actions and operations, it seeps slowly and relentlessly into every crack, into every sphere and aspect of Russian life. In the first 6 months, or perhaps even a year, it was only those individuals who went to the front lines, who actually participated in the conflict, who truly knew there was a war, who genuinely felt its presence and impact. For everyone else, it was like, well, they're destroying Ukrainians, killing for Russia, but whatever. It's so far away, it's not interesting at all. But over time, this military corrosion is eating away at Russia. It has started to corrode. At first, only the Russian border regions felt it. And then, as we said, until the entire Russian people understand and feel the war on their own skin, of course, it will be difficult for us to win. Time goes on, and Russia is being consumed by this military corrosion. And it is on the verge of what? On the verge of collapse. And these are the processes. We were just talking about the political and social internal processes, the moods, the clashes between different ethnic groups within Russia, again provoked by the economy because of unemployment, because there's no one to work. And look, see how everything is connected. Because of the crisis, and Nabulina and their ministers of economy have been shouting about this, really shouting, for probably about 6 months now. Because we remember that Nabulina said, if by the end of the summer, and now autumn is already ending, if by the end of this summer, the beginning of autumn, Russia does not end the war, then an economic collapse will occur. These are not empty words. She actually knows how to do the math. And by the way, it's thanks to her that Russia's economy has managed to keep going so far. This shift to a war footing, she was largely responsible for that. So, in a way, that's her doing. She's a major aide to Putin in the war. In fact, she's one of the main accomplices, by the way. Not the one signing military orders to shoot at someone, but the one signing off on what makes it possible for bombs to fly, for shots to be fired, and so on at Ukraine. So, why food ration cards? It's very simple because the war has caused such an imbalance in various sectors of the Russian economy that people started earning more and flocked there accordingly, not because of market-driven high salaries, but primarily at military enterprises. There are so many of them now because of government contracts, and because you can steal a ton of money there, which is a favorite national pastime for Russians. And accordingly get a big salary. They don't care that you're working as a killer. In other words, you become a direct accomplice to the war, a war criminal. Even if, I don't know, you're just wiping down those drones, polishing them with oil, what difference does it make? It's still a weapon that's about to go off and kill Ukrainian children. So you become a killer. No, still, they don't feel like their hands are covered in blood because of this, as long as they're getting paid. So, look, people have come to work at these enterprises, but everyone else has left other sectors, and now there's a catastrophic shortage of workers there. So agriculture is the sector that's been hit the hardest. Look at what's happening. Because the economy is out of balance, things are getting worse and worse for them. Their interest rates on loans have gone up, and all businesses, small, medium, large, are in debt. And the bigger the business, the more loans they have. Just ask any business owner. And the situation has reached a point where taking out loans is no longer profitable because it's impossible to pay the interest since the rates have gone up so much due to the state of the economy. So what started to happen? Just look at how many agricultural enterprises across Russia have closed down, gone bankrupt, or are barely surviving over these almost 4 years of the major war. That means they're producing less and there's less equipment overall. And another thing, previously, everything was purchased abroad. This is all because of the war, sanctions, and the economy. If before only Western equipment was bought everywhere, thank you. Combines, processors, seeders. I mean, agriculture these days is a highly high-tech process. For livestock, there are milking machines and all sorts of equipment. We understand that for things to be fast, large-scale, and relatively cheap in terms of profit and product supply, you need this technology. But Russia doesn't produce any of this. All the Western equipment was purchased and Western machinery was used everywhere. After the start of the major war, it became impossible to replace equipment or buy new machinery. Moreover, the equipment that is there constantly breaks down and needs parts. It's impossible to get spare parts. You see, everything is smuggled under the table. Somehow they manage to get something, somewhere they don't. Sometimes they cobble something together themselves in a really makeshift way, you know? That's it. So what happens as a result? In the end, the sectors that are supposed to feed the country, in other words, have basically fallen apart. And in fact, you and I have already talked about this. When some economists say that food riots are not far off in Russia and that bread could simply disappear. And that's exactly what happened in the Soviet Union. We remember the times when sometimes bread disappeared, sometimes sausage, sometimes meat or something else, and the shelves were constantly empty, and that's exactly why there were food ration cards. So you see, history is repeating itself. They don't know anything new, these officials, they only remember how things were in the Soviet era, but they're actually making it even worse than it was back then. It's actually very logical. If things keep going this way, they simply won't have anything to eat, even though they have fertile land. Come on, it's the largest country in the world by territory. There's so much to develop, to plant, to sow, to grow. Seriously. They just shouldn't be waging war. For once, do something constructive for yourselves. Damn it. Just grow things and eat what you produce. Or sell it. You could export so much of what you grow. But no, you see, they want to export death, filth, their own crap, Russian crap. That's what they're interested in exporting. Well, fine, now they've ended up with food ration cards. Good for them.
Right now, just as we're talking, I'm reading the news. At this very moment in St. Petersburg, law enforcement is conducting raids against street musicians. More than 30 administrative reports have already been filed. Explain to me what's going on. Were they really so negatively provoked by Swan Lake being performed? You see, they're constantly arresting, handing out administrative detentions to musicians. I couldn't even imagine that arrest would start because of music. I remember
a joke from the Soviet era. And now I'm thinking, which period was it? Probably after Stalin. That's when this joke appeared, when a man is standing on Red Square with a placard. Right away, a police patrol comes up to him, runs over and grabs him. That's it. We're taking you to jail. You're under arrest. What are you demanding? He shows them the placard, and in the corner of the placard, it's completely blank. Nothing is written. They say, so what? Like, there's nothing written. Where are your demands? He says, what is there to write? Everything is clear as it is. But even for a placard that's, blank, they grab and detain you. Look, what does this really tell us? This is a clear sign of a system that's already deeply afraid of even the slightest rustle. On one hand, it's an incredible tightening of the screws within the state. But on the other hand, it shows just how fragile this whole thing is inside, because it's afraid that even the tiniest sprout will grow into something, and it won't be able to suppress or control it unless it strangles it right at the root, you see? So this is, well, it's an understandable story, considering that the socioeconomic and political situation inside the country is getting worse. They're trying to intimidate people at every turn you see right now. In other words, the main national idea in Russia right now within the country is fear, so that no one says anything, not a single word. This is Voinovich, this is Moscow 2042. Just read it again and have a laugh at how he predicted the future. And to what level of absurdity one person, well, obviously with his cronies, has driven a huge number of people, tens of millions. Well, of course, let me tell you, it's an astonishing phenomenon when there are 140 million slaves. You understand? Because in reality, if you count it up, Putin, some of his associates, the service staff, and his personal army, because the army itself is not Putin's army. Only the National Guard, and even that only conditionally, is the force that can protect him. That's why he's expanding it so much, you see? So that they become his personal security bureau. But the fact is, he's very afraid for his own safety. All the other security forces and branches of this security apparatus could turn anyway at any moment. So look, compared to 140 million people, how many are at the top? What percentage are those who basically keep everyone in fear or have subdued everyone, and people are afraid to even speak up? And they just sit there obediently like a herd, as I say. They go along with all of this, and moreover, most of them even sing along with it. In other words, they consciously choose to live in filth and crap just to chant the same slogans, fascist ones.
Right now, too, when you and I are discussing and monitoring the news, there's this Z community, the Z military bloggers. Russia could lose as many soldiers over Pokrovsk as the Wehrmacht did, lost during the capture of Poland, as was indignantly stated in the community by writer and associate of Girkin Strelkov, Maxim Kalashnikov. He said that Russia's losses in taking Pokrovsk could be comparable to the losses at Bakhmut. Back then, Yevgeny Prigozhin claimed that tens of thousands of soldiers died in the battle for that city, just from private military companies alone. What do you think about that?
But by the way, sometimes these so-called incors do tell the truth. That's what I'll say. Just like with Gherkin, it breaks through from time to time. That is, they're terrorists. It's like a toad and a viper. Their terrorists from time to time say some reasonable things. You remember how Prigozhin spoke out when he openly declared that it was Putin who started this war only because of personal ambitions. How many Russian soldiers they lost, blah, blah, blah. What did they end up with, and why did they even go into Ukraine in the first place, remember? So from time to time, these terrorists suddenly start saying things that are actually factual. Do you see what I mean? When the war ends, and it will end eventually, it won't last forever. The hot phase will definitely come to an end. Not only will these questions immediately come up, they'll arise the very next day. And there will be a huge number of other questions as well. For what reason, for what purpose, for what supposed benefit to Russia did Putin and his team sacrifice, kill 1.5 or 2 million Russians? I'm talking now about internal Russian conflicts, and destroy the entire Russian economy through hunger, lack of medicine, or hospitals that don't work, or ambulances that can't run because there's no fuel. A couple more million died, a couple more million left the country, and the rest of the nation simply had another 30, maybe 50 years of any hope for a normal European future taken away from them. Any hint of a normal European future has been lost for the next 30 or even 50 years. We discussed this. You really can't feel sorry for them because they did this to themselves. They chose this path. And as you can see, most of them are fine with it. Yes, there are reasonable people, but they mostly just sit quietly, afraid to speak out. That's why it's 100% certain that people will come and ask questions, these military bloggers and others. But as for what form those questions will take, there are different possibilities. And some of those possibilities are the kind that Putin is already very afraid of, even now.
All is, of course, to wrap things up, I want to talk to you about this sort of parallel reality that Trump lives in. Trump just said that he had a wonderful conversation with Xi, everything was great, with Modi just perfect, and now India is refusing Russian oil. And every economist I spoke to told me the same thing. Neither Russia, nor India, nor China is refusing Russian oil. India continues to buy and will keep buying. But again, Trump comes out and for the 10th time says, that's it, India has refused, Modi has refused, my great friend, comrade, my favorite person, and so on and so forth. You see, moreover, now Orban comes out and says, well, Putin is about to meet with Trump in Budapest. Literally any day now, we just need to prepare a couple more things and then they'll meet. News like this just makes our audience's heads spin because it's constant, information that later gets denied. How do you assess all of this?
Yes, but Trump also said that he believes that in the process of resolving the war in Ukraine, he phrased it something like that, he has made great progress and significant advances. Yeah, like everything is almost fine already.
Dear, just please explain to our esteemed and dear audience.
Look, the recipe is the same. You don't need to react or respond immediately to every single statement and every quote that you hear right now. Almost no one does. You need to look at actions. Is Trump meeting with Putin? No. Is it clear that this meeting will happen in terms of prerequisites, preparations, and what Putin is ready to agree to? No. Has there been any kind of ceasefire? Have they maybe stopped shelling Ukraine, maybe stopped hitting residential buildings, or stopped striking Ukrainian stations? No, on the contrary. Is it maybe somehow easier for our guys on the front? No. It's all no. That's why we're on the ground. We understand what's really happening. What Orban is saying is absolutely just his own pre-election PR. That's what he wants. He doesn't just want a meeting between Trump and Putin in Budapest. He really wants Trump in Budapest because he wants to try to win his next election with Trump's help. He wants to use him as his VIP campaigner, That's why by hook or by crook, he can't just lure him to Budapest because for Trump, listen, what reason would he have? What would make him just go to Budapest for no reason, right? Especially since, Trump probably thinks Orban is the president of Turkey, not Hungary. You get it? But Turkey is still a big country, the strongest army in NATO, just for the record, probably one of the biggest, at least. So he would definitely go there without a second thought. But here, what's the point? That's why for Orban, you have to look at this in context. It's purely a pre-election move that he's trying to spin. And why does Trump say things like that? Well, because the media keeps asking him about it all the time. It's actually a good thing that journalists keep asking at every. And notice, every time he talks to the press, anytime friends, it's very interesting. Maybe we've never discussed it in this context before, but any interview, anytime he talks to the press, and it doesn't mean there are Ukrainian journalists there. Absolutely not. Not at all times. But among the questions, the topic of Ukraine will definitely come up. Well, that's great. The fact is, no one gives him a chance, even if, for example, he wanted to forget about it, and he will have to deal with it. So, since he's constantly being asked, and for now, this process is ongoing, but there are no results yet. I'll tell you this. I'll say that I'm afraid we won't see any major concrete results, like in terms of something specific being handed over to us, something that would change the course of the war, something like that. Well, I don't know if that will happen before the new year. For now, as you can see, it's just this ongoing process, but the struggle continues. The process is ongoing. It's possible that some actions will only really pick up after the new year.
Our dear and respected audience, we always, no matter what, is there electricity or not? What's the weather like? How are you feeling? Every week, Olesia and I are here for you as always. We come on at the end of the weekend, Saturday or Sunday, always show up, discuss all the week's current events, and make predictions. Of course, making predictions for the next week is a thankless task. We understand that this is a long road. We wish our army to hold out right now, especially in Pokrovsk. All our prayers are with them. Friends, support our army, the armed forces of Ukraine. Give us a like. Write in the comments where you're watching us from. And Olesia, I am very grateful to you. And I hope that next week we will meet again and discuss many more positive news. Thank you.
Dasha, thank you, friends.